Careful, dude. Watch the pool cue, man.
10 movies to watch if you like the Hellraiser movie franchise. Clive Barker had an infant filmmaking career in Hollywood, despite that his influence on Hollywood and horror movies is immense. What started with the original Hellraiser film in 1987 went on to become a phenomenon in the years to come. The Cenobites, specifically Pinhead, became horror icons comparable to the likes of Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface. With the 2022 Hellraiser film and the female Pinhead, the love for the franchise has revived. But until we all wait to meet the Cenobites once again, we could kill time by watching these 10 movies that are destined to be loved by anyone who's a Hellraiser fan. So without further ado, let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Number 1. Nightbreed, 1990. Written and directed by Barker himself and based on his novella Cabal, Nightbreed essentially follows the troubled relationship between a crazy psychiatrist and his patient. It somehow reminds me of the chemistry shared between Dr. Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham from the TV show. So the protagonist of the film, Aaron Boone, started having nightmares about a place called Midian, which was a place that housed supernatural entities and demons. But that doesn't quite sound sane, right? So his girlfriend convinces Aaron to visit a psychiatrist named Decker, played by the master of body horror, David Cronenberg. But Decker was secretly a family-hating serial killer who had sent several families to their early graves. Decker convinces Boone that he has committed Decker's murders. The evil shrink asks Boone to turn himself in, but one thing leads to another, and Boone finds himself in the company of a self-mutilating patient named Narcisse. Later, both of them end up in Midian. The city lived beneath a graveyard situated in the middle of nothingness, and the strange denizens of Midian gave refuge to Boone, but not before making him like themselves. But that's not Boone's happy ending, because Decker and a bunch of bad cops are hot on Boone's trail. Meanwhile, Boone's girlfriend Lori is conducting her own investigation. In Nightbreed, the father of Cenobites created a world of monsters and beasts that came from all walks of life and somewhat became immortal, at least to those who have watched the film. It could be said without an ounce of doubt that the creatures that Barker created are hellishly demented and yet exceptionally imaginative. But there are more connections between Hellraiser and Nightbreed than one would imagine. Several characters of the Hellraiser movies starred in Nightbreed, including Doug Bradley, who played the legendary Pinhead. While Bradley played the role of Lylesburg, the leader of the Nightbreed, other actors such as Simon Bamford, who played the Butterball Cenobite, played the character of Onaka in Nightbreed.
Be my victim.
Number 2. Candyman, 1992. Another legendary horror icon, Candyman, was once a human named Daniel Robitel, who became the victim of brutal racism and was killed by a swarm of bees because of a lynch mob. After his death, he turned into a vengeful serial killer who could be summoned by chanting his name 5 times in front of a mirror. Once summoned, Candyman kills his summoner with a hook attached to his arm. In the movie, Helen Lyle comes across the urban legend of Candyman and discovers a string of at least 25 murders in which the killer used the same modus operandi as the Candyman. And as should be expected, Helen and her friend attempted to summon the Candyman, but they seemingly fail. But it's not before long that Candyman makes his presence known to Helen and reveals his desire to quench his bloodlust. What happens next is not entirely for the weak of the stomach. Candyman and his way of killing sink the teeth of fear deep inside the viewer's bones and become more potent because of the relatability with the modern world's social issues like racial alienation and poverty. Comparable to horror icons such as Jason and Freddy, Candyman is a force to reckon with. However, he does share quite a bit of similarity with the Cenobites. I mean, much like these minions of pain and pleasure have to be summoned using the Lamech configuration, the Candyman also has to be summoned. Candyman is one of those few boogeyman movies that hides a social message behind all the blood and killing.
I want you to listen to me very carefully, and I'm gonna get you out of there.
Number 3. Event Horizon, 1997. Released in 1997, the film is set 50 years into the future in the year 2047. A distress signal is received from a starship called Event Horizon that had mysteriously disappeared in the year 2040. The equally mysterious reappearance causes another ship called Lewis and Clark to go to Event Horizon and find out more. One thing leads to another, and the crew of Lewis and Clark is forced to get aboard Event Horizon. But right from the beginning, the crew starts to experience strange things. From suicidal thoughts to being haunted by hallucinations correspondent to personal fears and regrets, the crew finds it very difficult to survive, let alone bring back information. One of the video logs shows the that the crew of the lost and found ship indulged in purely hedonistic acts before mutilating each other in the most horrific of ways. It's soon revealed that the ship had actually opened a gateway between our dimension and another hellish dimension outside our universe. Furthermore, Event Horizon was now sentient, so whatever happened to the crew of Lewis and Clark? Directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, Event Horizon was poorly received upon its release, and the film failed to impress even the critics. Over the years, the film has gained a cult following and is remembered as one of the more intelligent horror movies of the 90s. Much like the Hellraiser films, Event Horizon concerns itself with other dimensions, the nuances that come with an obsession, and the sadomasochism, which explains why the crew killed each other, and the possession of the ship itself by an unknown force. Furthermore, there are tons of religious imagery that Anderson used in his film, starting with the first shot in which the starship looks like a giant cross, and the inside of the starship easily reminds the viewer of a darkened cathedral, albeit with several sci-fi elements. All in all, it's a good film, but I can't help feel that it was more of a lost opportunity.
Let's go! Right.
Number 4. Reanimator, 1985. After successfully reanimating a cat, Herbert West travels to Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts to further his studies and become a man of medical science. He demonstrates the effect of a strange reagent that brings dead tissues back to life, albeit in a zombified way. West and his friend Dan start reanimating people in the university, but at their personal peril. Unfortunately for the two of them, one of the undead men takes control of the others and a strange series of events is set in motion. But to make things worse, West seems to have lost control over the things he has created. This Stuart Gordon film is often celebrated for the intelligence with which it handles themes of sexual intimacy, violence, and horror in general. The show was clearly stolen by the lead actors Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West and the greatest scream queen Barbara Crampton as Megan Halsey. I am pretty sure that the fans of Hellraiser have watched this classic at one point or another, but to those select few who haven't, I strongly recommend it. Gordon's film doesn't shy away from being a larger-than-life comedy splatter. That's quite the reason why this film will always be considered an inspiration behind future horror comedies like Zombieland and Shaun of the Dead. Oh, and by the way, watch out for the scene where a decapitated head and a torso of a man are reanimated separately. Stuff from the nightmares, I tell you. Number 5. Silent Hill, 2006. Christopher and his wife Rose begin to worry about their daughter Sharon's constant nightmares about the now abandoned town of Silent Hill in West Virginia. In addition to the nightmares, Sharon suffers from constant sleepwalking, and as a last-ditch resort to help Sharon, Rosie takes her on a trip to Silent Hill in the hopes of finding answers. However, once they reach Silent Hill, they meet an accident caused by a girl who came before their car. Rose wakes up in the woods to find that Sharon is missing. She is then joined by a police officer named Sybil Bennett, and the two of them figure out that they are trapped in a whole other dimension. Furthermore, this fog-shrouded dimension of Silent Hill is plagued with all kinds of monsters, including the vicious and uber-dangerous Pyramid Head. It turns out that the girl who caused Rose and Sharon's accident was actually an aspect of a young girl named Alessa Gillespie, who was burned on charges of being a witch. Would Rose and Sharon ever leave Silent Hill? I don't know about you, but I personally believe that Silent Hill is easily one of the best video game adaptations ever made. I mean, yes, I know that's not quite high a bar, but it's an achievement nonetheless. Radha Mitchell as Rose Da Silva and Sean Bean as Christopher have nailed their parts in a film that is driven by women, including the villains and the heroes. Much like the Hellraiser films, there's another dimension in which the good guys, or maybe girls, get trapped and are hunted by monstrous entities with pyramids as heads. These inhuman beings exist only to scare the crap out of you, and getting out of the dimension is probably as difficult as breaking out of Leviathan's labyrinth. Number 6. The Evil Dead, 1981. 5 Michigan State students decide to vacation in a remote cabin in the middle of Tennessee country. What could go wrong, they said. But everything came spiraling down when the kids stumbled upon a translated version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Along with the book, they find a strange recording, which the playful and curious friends play. The recordings were, in fact, incantations from the Book of the Dead, which led to the release of dark forces that began to turn the kids into undead monstrosities. To make things worse, they find out that the only way to get rid of the demon is through severing someone who was possessed. It's not long before that the friends turn into foes, but worse still, they have to save themselves from death in a morally questionable vine. If a Cabin in the Woods movie is made even today, it is compared to Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, and that's saying something. What Sam Raimi did was give a deeper meaning and authority to this horror subgenre. Raimi's film is high on violence, but there's a certain grace to it. It is visceral, but not over the top, and despite all this, Evil Dead is grimly funny. I mean, Raimi makes you judge yourself for laughing or smirking at dark scenes. A blessing in disguise for Evil Dead was its relatively low budget, which meant that they had to depend on real stuff to shoot the scenes instead of using rich and elaborate sets. I mean, if there's the shotgun being fired, it has real bullets. If chainsaw is being used, it is also quite real. I think the charm of this $50,000 film shot on a 16mm camera was best described by Empire magazine when they wrote, "Unbound by cinematic convention." Raimi unleashed his free-range camera and ghoulish, omnipresent sound effects to create a bleak, paranoid atmosphere and a raft of sudden, effective shocks. Number 7. Lord of Illusions, 1995. Year, 1982. Place, Mojave Desert. A cult leader named Nyx, who likes to call himself the Puritan, is about to sacrifice a young girl by pitting her against an angered baboon. Nyx claims that he would purify the world and give it wisdom, but a few of his followers left his side because of his extreme and violent methods. These ex-cultists included a man named Philip Swan, who now wanted to put an end to Nyx's methods. These men attacked the cult, and a fight ensued, in which Dorothy, the girl to be sacrificed, shoots Nyx in the heart, effectively killing him. Several years later, Dorothy marries Swan out of obligation and gratitude, but Dorothy is still worried about her husband, who's become the world's greatest illusionist. So in order to ensure his safety, she hires a troubled occult investigator, but the worst comes to place when Swan dies when one of his own illusions goes wrong. The investigator soon learns that Nyx might be back from the dead. Written and directed by Clive Barker and based on his story The Last Illusion, the film is as demoniacal and strange as his other movies, especially Hellraiser. Furthermore, Barker does not shy away from fusing perverse acts with kinks such as bondage. If that's not enough, the plot is riddled with bloody tortures and rituals that attempt to heighten the grim tone of the movie. But at the end of the day, all of that is subdued by stronger themes and sequences like necromancy and consumption of good and bad people by damaged tissue. Often regarded as Barker's most underrated piece of work, Lord of Illusions could have been a bit crispier and a bit low on the bland and abundant bloodshed. Instead of the superfluous details, they should have focused more on things like resurrection. Nevertheless, Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions is one of those films that divide fans and critics alike, but I recommend it for the suspenseful build-up. Number 8. A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. A teenage girl named Tina Gray wakes up from a terrifying nightmare in which a horrid figure with razor-sharp blades for fingernails attacks her. But her trauma doesn't end there because she wakes up the following morning with 4 mysterious slashes. It becomes quite clear that the attacks Tina suffered in her dreams had somehow manifested in her waking life. But Tina couldn't survive for long and was finally killed. The next day, one of Tina's friends, Nancy, experiences a similar episode when she sleeps in her class, but Nancy knows better than to remain asleep. She deliberately came in contact with a hot pipe in her boiler room dream and woke up with excruciating pain, only to find an actual burn in her arm. Soon, Nancy finds out that a disfigured man from her nightmares was once called Freddy Krueger, a child serial killer who took the lives of around 20 children. Although he was released by the court on technical grounds, the victim's parents burned him alive. But will she succumb like Nancy, or will she defeat Freddy, a vengeful ghost hellbent on satiating his psychopathic hunger for young kids? Imagine a monstrosity that haunts you not in the real world, but in the mysterious, shadowy world of dreams that's basically the crux of Wes Craven's masterpiece called A Nightmare of Elm Street. And quite naturally, the film became an invention that laid the groundwork for several future films. The struggle to differentiate between reality and dreams was depicted through the lens of promiscuous teens and socially unacceptable standards of morality. Despite being one of the more successful franchises with 6 sequels, 1 reboot, and 1 crossover with the Friday the 13th franchise, Craven's original will always remain the best of the lot, and for the right reasons. Director Craven took the simple idea of sleep and painted it with marvelously insidious colors to provide the 80s audience with a fresh experience, which had both gore and food for thought.
You have to pick. Dare. I dare you to shoot Olivia.
Number 9. Truth or Dare 2018. A few years prior to the film's timeline, a nun named Inez Reyes intentionally summoned a vicious demon to protect herself from a sadistic and abusive priest. The demon, Calix, went on to possess the game of Truth or Dare and killed all her friends. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and the nun performs a ritual to trap the demon in a pot. The ritual costs the nun her tongue. Years later, someone finds the pot and releases Calix. In the current time, a group of friends find themselves inadvertently playing this supernatural version of Truth or Dare, and anyone who fails to answer the truth or comply with the said dare gets killed. Will any of them survive? Honestly, I didn't want to find out the answer to that question halfway through the movie. The film about a demon torturing a bunch of teens is torture to sit through, and what makes it worse is its tortured premise. Nevertheless, there may be something for Hellraiser fans, but that's about it. That's all I could say about this strange attempt by Blumhouse Productions. Number 10. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre follows the story of a young girl named Sally Hardesty and her friends who hit the back roads of Texas on their way to Sally's grandfather's grave, which could have been vandalized by grave robbers. But on their way to the said place, they make a pit stop at a sinister clapboard house, hoping that they would get some gas for their car. But little did they realize that this was the house of the extremely dangerous Leatherface and his ghoulish family of cannibalistic psychopaths. One by one, the hippie teens are finished off. Sally Hardesty soon realizes that the only person who can help her with this demented cannibal and his chainsaw would be herself. What will she do? Based on the true story of the infamous serial killer Ed Gein, Texas Chainsaw Massacre set the benchmark for slasher movies, and that's because the horror in this Tobe Hooper movie goes beyond blood and gore. Texas Chainsaw Massacre starts on a high note and never loses its intensity. The movie proved that heroism doesn't always pay off, and survival is a luxury when you're faced with evil beings such as Leatherface. It's far from a piece of art or a flawless movie, but it most certainly is a formidable piece of directorial skill that seems as if a comic was brought to life. If you have been a fan of Hellraiser movies or any of the other classic franchises, you already have my respect. In a world that's being overloaded with superhero content, it is imperative that genre fans continue to exist. Leave your questions, suggestions, and corrections in the comments.